Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie. So I work for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Within that, we have the Division of Fish and Wildlife, which is where I work, and then even smaller within the Division of Fish and Wildlife, we have our Black Bear Project. So this is a team of biologists, educators, all sorts of people who are specifically involved with the conservation and management of our state's black bears. So black bears kind of get a bad rep, both ends of the spectrum, right? So these are, amazing creatures that are vital to our ecosystem. They play an amazing role, which we will talk about, but they tend to get portrayed in, on both extremes, and both of these stereotypes are harmful. Either super cute and cuddly, and they can't do any harm, and I want to feed them and be their friend, or they're vicious, ferocious carnivores that are a threat to public safety. So as with most things, the truth lies somewhere in between, and I hope that by talking to you all tonight, you can, maybe if you were, I doubt, since my audience is a nature club, that you were on either end of that spectrum, but one of my biggest jobs is to convince people that black bears are amazing animals that are worthy of our conservation and our attention, but they are also wild animals that deserve our respect. So not only are we going to talk about their biology, we'll talk about our research program at Fish and Wildlife, what we do, what we've been doing since the 80s to learn about our state's black bear population. And then we'll kind of pivot into what sort of unique problems do we have here in New Jersey, being a state where we are very densely populated with humans, very, very developed, but living super close to a lot of wildlife, black bears namely. What sorts of problems can that cause? And then we'll talk about prevention methods, how you can reduce the chance for human-wildlife conflict with these bears, and what you should do if you are out on a hike and you do see a black bear. How should you act? How should you respond? And I hope that I can also bust some myths that maybe you've heard before in your travels about black bears. So just a quick history in New Jersey. They are a native species, so they were here prior to European colonization. They live in the forested regions of the state. So forests are really important for black bears, not only because of their diet, so forests are producing most of the food that they're eating, but it also shapes their behavior. So the first thing I want to show you, because black bears evolved to live in these forested habitats, they evolved these really short curved claws that are ideal for climbing trees. So black bears are excellent tree climbers. And this is actually the reason that they're more of a shy bear species. So black bears, when you run into one, spoiler alert for our safety section, but making noise is really 90% of the time going to scare that bear away. They are very shy animals because their first instinct when they feel a threat is to climb up a tree. Not much can get at a black bear up a tree. You'll see a mom with her cubs. She'll have specific vocalizations that she uses to tell her cubs, something is amiss, get up that tree. We call them babysitter trees. Mothers will leave their cubs up in a tree for hours on end while they're searching for food. So that forested habitat shapes a lot of their behavior. Compared to our grizzly bear claw, so historically, grizzly bears evolved to live in the Great Plains. We've kind of pushed them more into the mountainous regions of our country, but they did evolve to live in these large expanses of treeless areas. So they couldn't use the trees to their advantage. So if you know anything about grizzly bears, one thing you might know is that they are much more of a defensive type of bear than a black bear. So how you might respond to them and how you might treat them in the wild might be a little bit different than a black bear. And trees are really one of the biggest reasons for that. That difference in habitat shapes not only their diet, but their behavior as well. And understanding these important aspects of black bear behavior can help us make decisions to act more appropriately around them to keep ourselves safer. So understanding their biology and their behavior is an amazing way to keep yourself safe. Historically, they could be pretty much found anywhere throughout the US. That lighter green color is their historic range. That darker green color is their current range, which is of course much smaller. So things like habitat loss and unregulated killing, mostly in the 1900s and so, really decimated their populations. But so this is the parts of New Jersey that we would consider good black bear habitat. So everywhere that's green, we pretty much have the highlands up here and then the pine barrens down south. So these green areas represent what we would call good black bear habitat. The red areas are areas that are more urban, more developed, closer to New York City and closer to Philadelphia. And it used to be, this is a map from 1995, the red area is where we've had reported black bear activity. So it used to be that nearly all of our black bear population was concentrated in that area of good black bear habitat, that heavily forest region in the northwest area of the state. Then this map is from 2000. You can see that their activity is starting to expand a little bit more southward and eastward. All the way to our map from 2023, we have now spotted black bears in all 21 counties of New Jersey. So technically, anywhere you are in New Jersey, you do have the opportunity to see a black bear. And what's most notable is they're moving into what we would consider poor black bear habitat. So developed areas, urban areas, which is creating a lot more opportunity for humans to have conflicts with these animals. And humans that are not used to living near wildlife like this, people in more urban areas. So it really creates this need for education. And because there's a lot of people that this is just not how they grew up. They don't know what to do around wildlife. So there's really two reasons for this. Population expansion. So black bears are doing really well in our state. We have a lot of great natural foods for them and a lot of good habitat. About 60% of our state is actually preserved land. So we do have a lot of great habitat for them. But also just increasing development that does get rid of their natural habitat, does force them more and more to move into developed areas. So let's talk about what makes a black bear a black bear. They are our largest land mammal, blue whale technically being our largest mammal. We talked about they need that forested habitat. They also love swamps and wetlands. They don't have sweat glands. And they've got those big, thick coats, so in the summer especially, they like to cool down in these wet areas, muddy areas. That's really how they cool themselves. And black bears are what we call opportunistic omnivores, which is a fancy way of saying if it comes across their path and they can get their hands on it, they're going to eat it. If it fits, they're going to give it a try. So what they're eating does depend on the season. So in the summer, it's mostly things like fruits and berries. In the spring, it's a lot of new emergent vegetation, so grasses, skunk cabbage, all of the new vegetation that's coming and that's not like really hard and thick yet. In the fall, their most important food source is acorns, hickory nuts, beech nuts, really hard mast, so hard things that trees are producing. And acorns are actually the single most important food item for them and can be determinative of the success of their population. So even though it's mostly an autumn food, it is pretty much their most valuable resource, which is one of the reasons why they do so well in New Jersey. We have a lot of great deciduous forests that are producing this hard mast for them. Throughout the year, they'll eat bugs, they'll eat small mammals if they can get a hold of them, and carrion, so animals that are already deceased. But 75 to 90% of their diet is plant-based, which a lot of people might be surprised to find out. So I have to say it, not all black bears are black, so the name is a little bit confusing. They can come in a range of colors, especially out west, anywhere from blonde to bluish gray to all different shades of brown and black and even white in some areas of British Columbia. In New Jersey, most of our bears are black, but we have had a couple reported occasions of what we call a cinnamon phase bear. So it's this reddish light brown. So the only native bear we have in New Jersey is the black bear. And that's true for all throughout the East Coast as well. So if you see a bear in the wild, not in a zoo setting, doesn't matter the color, it is a black bear. So all of the biology, all of the behavior and safety information applies. I even had a woman at one presentation tell me that she was sure that there was a polar bear outside of her condo, and her 5-year-old granddaughter confirmed it. So, but they're all black bears, I promise. So just a couple more things about black bears. It's kind of a myth. That's the first myth I guess I'll address, is that they have really poor vision. That's not really true. Their vision's pretty similar to ours, but their smell and their sense of hearing are just so much stronger that that's more what they're relying on, especially that sense of smell, which is something that kind of gets them into trouble, which we'll talk about in our safety section. But black bears can smell food from about 2 miles away. So smell is a difficult thing for scientists to quantify, but it's estimated that their sense of smell is about 100 times stronger than ours and about 7 times stronger than that of a bloodhound. So really incredible sense of smell. So yes, they can smell your trash from 2 miles away. We talked about those short curved claws, making them excellent climbers. They're also very strong swimmers. So a spoiler alert for our safety section, if you find yourself needing to get away from a black bear, climbing a tree, jumping in a lake, not really gonna help you out. So they're crepuscular, which just means that they are most active at dawn and dusk. So similar to deer, this is good to know when you're driving. These are gonna be the times of the day when bears are gonna be more likely to cross the roads. So you can just be more aware of that. Also, if you're thinking of going for a walk or a hike near a wooded area, we tend to advise not doing that alone in the early morning or in those twilight hours, because that's when they're most active. You can see a bear at any time during the day, but generally their pattern is they're resting in the middle of the day. They're pretty quick. They can run up to 35 miles per hour, which is pretty quick for a large animal. And this is over short distances. They don't quite have endurance. And about 25 years is an average lifespan. So in a zoo setting, they can probably get into their mid-30s. I think there was a grizzly bear that lived to be 40-something, but 25 in the wild is a pretty old black bear. 29 was the oldest that we have ever recorded in our research program from birth to death. So I mentioned black bears are a vital part of a healthy ecosystem. They do provide a lot of services. They help stop the spread of disease. So they do this in 2 ways. They're eating carrion, and they are eating insects, which can be disease vectors. So both of these things kind of help clean up the environment and stop the spread of disease. Some people refer to black bears as the gardeners of the forest. They are seed dispersers. So when they're eating things like fruit and nuts and berries, and then they're wandering off, 10, 20 miles and pooping those out, they are spreading those plant genetics. When they're digging for bugs, they're tilling the earth. So they're actually doing a lot to keep the forest healthy. They also aid in the decomposition process and returning dead organic material back into the soil when they're digging through dead logs looking for bugs and grubs, when they're digging through the dirt to look for roots. So they really are the gardeners and the farmers of the forest. So just like pigs, actually, we refer to adult males as boars. And in our state, bears get pretty big. So on average, an adult boar will be about just under 400 pounds. But in our state, we've recorded up to 854 pounds is our current record. I believe the record largest black bear is found in North Carolina, but we have a lot of conservationists, biologists, and hunters that think that that bear is in New Jersey, and we just haven't found him yet. So these two were sedated for different reasons. This guy here had gotten a pretty deep laceration on his nose trying to get into a dumpster while we were doing a research program, so that's actually one of our wildlife vets that was stitching up his nose. He was 726.5 pounds at that time, and that was not his heaviest. So they're generally at their heaviest in the autumn, and this was during the summer. So that's probably an 800-pound bear. This guy on the right, we didn't get a weight on him. He was part of our research trapping, which I'll talk about when I talk about our research program. But the guy behind him, Joe Garris, one of our longest wildlife biologists, still working for the division, he's about 6'2". So that bear makes him look tiny. I can't believe he actually fit in the trap, but. So females are almost always smaller, usually just under 200 pounds, but they can get upwards of 300-400. It's just really not as common. And typically once a female reaches maturity in adulthood, she'll stay about the same size, where these males can just keep getting bigger throughout their life. The home range for a female is also a lot smaller. So I like to tell people, if you see a female with cubs in your backyard, you're probably right smack in the middle of her home range. That's probably the same bear you're seeing year after year. Females tend to stay in an area in our state of less than 2 square miles. The males, it's much more variable. An average, maybe 10 to 18 square miles, but we've recorded bears going from Sussex County down to Lakehurst and back in a couple of days. I think it was 11 days that bear did that. We had him GPS collared. So males are much more transient, but the females tend to stay in a relatively small area. So there's 2 times of the year where you're going to be more likely to see a bear where activity increases. Summer is one of them. So not only is this their breeding season, but it's also when the females are kicking out their yearlings. So their cubs from the year prior, year and a half prior, that have reached their first birthday. They're about 18 months old at this point in the summer, and she kicks them out. So her female offspring are generally permitted to share some of mom's home range, but the males, to prevent inbreeding, have to go and find their own territory. So during the summer, we especially have a lot of young male bears. We kind of refer to them as the juvenile delinquents of the bear world because they're testing boundaries, they're young, they're trying to find their own space, their own territories. So we have a lot of bear movement at this time. The second time is the fall. So this is what we call hyperphagia, so excessive eating. Bears are getting ready to den up and be dormant for the winter, so they are absolutely stuffing their faces during the fall, trying to get as many calories as possible because they're going to be living off of those fat storages for about 4 to 5 months when they're not eating, drinking, really moving at all in the summer, or in the winter, I'm sorry. So technically what black bears undergo during the winter is called torpor, or we might refer to it as winter dormancy. It's not a true hibernation. So a true hibernator, like a groundhog, if you picked it up and shook it, it's not going to wake up. But a black bear can actually be pretty much fully active in about 2 minutes out of their den. So their respiration rate lowers, their body temperature lowers, their metabolic activity decreases, but it's not quite as dramatic as that of a true hibernator. So that's one of the reasons that we say if you're out, with your dog in the winter in bear country, keep them leashed, because we get reports almost every year of a dog that's found a bear den, disturbed it, and that bear is up and chasing dog back to mom and dad, within just a few minutes. So, and bear den sites look different depending on the bear, depending on the area. They are pretty much anything that looks cozy to a black bear. So rock cavities, little rock caves, fallen trees, hollowed out dead trees. But actually the most common type of den is just a bear that's dug a little hole in the ground, filled it with brush, and it looks like a little bird's nest right on the ground. So cubs are born in January, so that's why I said in the summer, they're all generally about 18 months old because they're all pretty much born in January, maybe sometimes early February. Bears undergo something fascinating called delayed implantation. So even though their breeding season is in the summer, those eggs don't actually implant in the uterus. The female doesn't actually become pregnant until November. So it's dependent on her putting on enough weight to sustain a pregnancy and nursing through her dormant period in the winter, because it's very energetically expensive for them. So if she hasn't gained enough calories, put on enough weight, those fertilized eggs get reabsorbed into her system. But if she has, then those eggs implant, and she will only be pregnant for about 2 months, 6 weeks to 2 months, and she'll give birth in January. The cubs, because that gestation is actually quite a short amount of time, they're really tiny, about the size of like a Poland Spring water bottle, under 1 pound, just at 1 pound at their biggest, but they grow really quickly. So by March, they're already about 5 pounds, and April is when they'll start leaving their den. They'll typically be about 8 to 12 pounds at that point. So bears in New Jersey can have anywhere from 1 to 6 cubs. And just to illustrate how quickly they grow, this is the same family unit, about a year apart. So I think this male here was actually larger than mom in just a year. So they grow really quickly. The most common litter size is 3, but we have recorded a couple instances of 6. So it's not necessarily common, but we've recorded it on more than one occasion. So One of those reasons is just we have a lot of great natural food sources for bears, and it allows them to be very productive. So I want to talk a little bit about our research program. You know, why are we out here cuddling bear cubs? What's the point of what we do? Why are we doing it? So we've got more than 40 years of continuous data on our state's population. So a really amazing data set. There's 3 main types of research that we're doing throughout the year. The first is called research trapping. So this is mainly how we are establishing how large our population is. If you know anything about mark recapture methods for estimating population size, it's basically this. We do research trapping twice a year where we will set traps for about a 2-week period. Every animal that we trap, we will tag. That animal gets re-released, and then we'll have another survey. And based on the amount of animals that are recaptured versus animals that are new, there's a mathematical equation we can use to estimate the full population. So research trapping is how we originally end up tagging those animals. So what that looks like, we've got 2 different types of traps that we use. This green one's called a culvert trap. Essentially, that's a little bag of bait. When the bear pulls on that bag of bait, triggers the door to slide down, and they'll be trapped in the culvert. The other type of trap that we'll use is called a foot snare. So it's a long piece of cord, basically, that when the bear steps in the center there, it triggers a mechanism that tightens that rope around their paw. It doesn't lock or anything, but they don't really understand how to get themselves out of it. Our goal is to not have the animals trapped for very long, so they're monitored very closely. The first thing that we need to do when we trap a bear is sedate them so that it's safe for us to handle that animal. So how that's done is a jab pole. So the drug that sedates them is put in a syringe on the end of a very long pole, so we don't have to get too close to that animal. We can also use tranquilizer darts, but the jab pole is a little bit safer for the animal. It injects the drug much more slowly. The darts tend to leave a big hematoma, so we're always trying to look for ways that make it more humane and comfortable for the animal. Takes about 10 minutes. It can really vary based on the age of the bear and the size of the bear. The younger bears tend to metabolize that drug really quickly. They'll go down quick and wake up quick, but about 10 minutes, and usually they'll stay down for about an hour. So in that hour, we are collecting a bunch of measurements, especially on the males, the size of their head and the size of their chest. It's going to give us a lot of information about their age and their body condition. We might do an age analysis. The only way to get an accurate age on a black bear is to pull one of their premolar teeth. You can actually count the rings on the teeth, and it'll give you an age on the bear, just like you would do. This is a piece of tooth stained and put under the microscope, and you can actually count those growth rings there. We'll also take a piece of skin tissue sample for DNA analysis. We're actually starting to move towards using a DNA-based method of estimating the population, which is a lot less invasive than this current mark recapture method that we've got going. So we're working with East Stroudsburg University to standardize and develop basically a program that will estimate our population with just DNA samples from bears. So actually, hopefully that data is out soon. We have data from 2013 up to 2023 analyzed. So we have 1 more year to analyze, and hopefully we'll be able to put out a report to the public soon. We'll also take a blood sample, so we can test for common diseases that they might have and just do a complete blood count, get a better idea of how healthy that animal is. And as I mentioned before, anytime that we are handling an individual, we will tag them. So these are little metal ear tags, and each ear tag will have an individual number on them. That's kind of like the bear's name. So this is how we know that we've already handled an individual. We can also get information like how long are bears living, because we have these bears in our database. We know we're tagging cubs. We know when they were born, when they're dying. Gives us a lot of valuable information about their lifespan, where they're living, where they're moving. And these ear tags do tend to fall off throughout the course of their life. So while they're sedated, we do also tattoo that number on the inside of their upper lip. So I never thought that I'd go to school for 8 years to tattoo bears, but here we are.
How do they do that?
Literally a tattoo gun from Amazon. The other type of research that we do throughout the year is called radiotelemetry. So it's kind of like GPS, but not quite as fancy. We'll fit our female bears with these radio collars. This piece right here will emit, every collar has a unique frequency of radio wave that it will emit. We'll have a receiver that we can tune in to pick up that specific frequency. Because we're only collaring females and they have such a small home range, we can kind of generally know where they are. We'll turn on our receiver and it's kind of like playing Marco Polo. Once it catches the frequency, it'll start beeping, and the closer we get to that bear, the louder it beeps. So that's actually how we find our females denned up in the winter, because we want to check on her while she's denned up. Sometimes we'll collar males if we're doing a specific research study on like home range size or habitat selection, but mostly it's just our females. Back in the heyday, we used to have maybe 50 to 60 females collared at a time. Right now, we only have about 8 to 10 collared. So that leads us to den work, which is probably the most fun thing we do. We do this in the beginning of March, so usually the first or second week of March. That's when we are finding our collared females. We will enter their dens, sedate mom while she's in the den. This is the most dramatic part. Most of the time, they just kind of grunt and fall asleep, but we have to be prepared also for them to leave the den kind of angry, because it usually does take about 10 minutes for them to be sedated. So that can be quite an exciting part of the day. But once mom is sedated, we'll have some biologists that are working up mom, seeing if her collar needs to be changed, taking blood on her, taking DNA. And then we'll have another set of biologists who are basically doing the same thing with the cubs. So they're getting weighed, they're getting measured, they're getting little cub ear tags. It's very cute.
Are the cubs sedated?
The cubs do not need to be sedated. No, they're so tiny at this point. So just because a common question I get is like, how am I going to know a bear den if I'm out on a hike? And my answer is usually you probably won't. They're very like nondescript. So this, you can see how small this opening is. And this is with mom sedated and halfway pulled out, and she had 4 cubs in there. I mean, that's a really tiny space, and that's advantageous to them to trap the heat, to be in as small of a space as possible. But I'm continually amazed about the sites that these bears pick for their dens. And they don't tend to return to the same den yearly. They'll pick different sites. So the cubs at this point are usually about 8 to 12 pounds. And we don't just pick them up for fun. There are reasons that we're holding the cubs. One of them is they need to stay warm. This was a particularly warm day, but a lot of times if it's a cold day, we'll have them under our jackets, so that, because they don't really have a full coat yet at this point. Another is they will bawl, make like whining noises. And if mom is starting to wake up from her drug, hearing the cry of her cubs is going to wake her up faster. So we're kind of, we have designated cub cuddlers that are trying to keep the cubs quiet and not stressed out. And it's just really cute. So because of all the research that we do with bears, how many bears we handle per year, we do have pretty accurate estimations of our population. Just as a caveat, the population work that we do is only in Northwest New Jersey. It's basically Sussex and Warren County is where we're doing our surveys. So the population estimate is going to be larger because we're really only conducting research in those areas. We estimate that we have about 3,000 bears in Northwest New Jersey, so that number is probably a little bit higher. And it does fluctuate a lot. You'll see a lot of peaks and valleys. Part of that is just because the nature of mark recapture, ecological work is not precise. There's lots of different reasons that we might get differing numbers, but maybe the population hasn't actually staggered that much. But it's been the DNA, I can't wait till the DNA report comes out because it shows that our population is doing really well and that it's very stable right now. So the past 4 or 5 years, the amount of breeding adults that we've had has been extremely consistent and very genetically diverse, meaning that actually the habitat is pretty well connected. Different bears are getting to mate with different bears. We're not having a lot of inbreeding going on. So I'm excited for that report to make its way out. So what sorts of problems can we have living so close to black bears? I know down here black bears are probably not as much of an issue, but as their population expands, their range expands, you might see bears moving more into where you are living. So it's always good to learn about how to be a good neighbor. So most of our problems that we have with black bears occur because black bears can get pretty easily habituated. So when we say habituated, we mean they've lost their natural fear of humans. And usually the pathway towards habituation is because they're being fed. I mean, this is literally a resident that was feeding, that's a bucket of Twinkies, feeding a family of black bears, livestock feed. So when bears start to realize that being near humans means getting these really calorie-dense foods, they tend to take more risks. They lose that natural fear because the reward is so great. And remember, bears have this biological need to get a year's worth of calories in a shortened period of time. So, half a jelly donut is really attractive to them. It is illegal to feed bears intentionally or unintentionally in New Jersey. It's a $1,000 fine. It's difficult to enforce, but that law is there. We are working on strengthening that law to really crack down, especially in areas of Northwest New Jersey where we have most of our bears. And the reason is feeding bears changes their behavior. Natural bear behavior is that they're quite skittish. They're very shy. They should be easily scared away. Clapping your hands, waving your arms. Normal bear behavior is for that bear to turn around and run. Usually, if you're on a hike, you're gonna see the mark of the bear. You might see bear scat. You might see marked up trees or overturned logs, but you're not gonna generally see a black bear because they'll hear you or they'll smell you and they keep their distance. But again, when they start to connect humans with a really amazing food source, calorie-dense food source, then they start to be less scared by noises, especially if those claps and shouts and bangs of your pot aren't really followed up by anything and they're still getting that half a jelly donut. They really start to become more bold. And that's when they start maybe causing property damage because they're trying to get into your shed because they know that there's some chicken feed in there, or they know that that's where you're storing your garbage cans before collection day, or maybe you've left your garage door slightly ajar and they're gonna try to get in. They can break into vehicles. They're surprisingly dexterous with their little paws. All the way to what we would consider threatening behavior, which is when black bears actually begin approaching people, approaching pets. Black bears are not naturally a very aggressive species of animal, but the more encounters that we have, the closer they start getting to people, the more of an opportunity we have for someone to get hurt. So we would consider that threatening behavior when they're starting to actually approach people, and that is what we want to avoid. So not all feeding is intentional. Most people are teaching bears to come into the neighborhood via their garbage. So not securing their garbage, not having good practices is really what's drawing these bears in. And it's a really difficult problem because even if you are securing your garbage, if your neighbor isn't, the bears are going to continue coming. Bird feeders are our number 2 bear draw into neighborhoods. So I have a bird feeder here that was chomped on pretty good by a bear not too far from our office. They love especially sunflower seeds, so that's a really big draw for them. And they're quite acrobatic at getting to them. So basically, when someone calls in that they've had an issue with a black bear or they have some sort of problem with a black bear, we will put that complaint into one of 3 categories. And the category designation helps us decide how we should respond. So a category 3 bear would be someone that's called that's just seen a bear. There's a bear walking through my backyard. Not a threat to public safety. This might often be what we call urban bears too, bears that have wandered into like a park in the middle of Trenton or something where they're not normally, and that might cause some action on our part where we need to move the animal, but generally these are bears that are just being bears. They're not a threat. Mostly our response then is just providing education to the caller. We typically don't actually come out and directly respond to these. Unless it is an urban bear that we do feel we need to remove. And in that instance, we'll just put them in our nearest wildlife management area to wherever the bear is. Category 2, that's when we start to get into what we call nuisance bear behavior. So these are bears that aren't necessarily a threat to public safety or property, but they're knocking over garbage cans, they're wandering through neighborhoods, trying to get into bird feeders, things like that. So kind of bordering on that area of this bear might become a problem. Category 1 bears, these are our bears which we do consider a threat to public safety and property. I guess I should mention for category 2, Our response is aversive conditioning, which I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide. And category 1, it takes a lot for us to determine that we need to remove a bear from the population, but it does happen. And nobody likes to do it, but it's for the public safety. Humans have to come first, and it's also for the health of the bear population. You know, we don't want people's attitudes to turn towards these animals. We want people to support conservation. We want people to want bears in our state. So we don't want a problem bear going out and turning people's attitudes sour towards them. So unfortunately, I think it's about 15 bears a year maybe that we have to make that decision for. It's really not a lot, but unfortunately that is how we have to handle category 1 bears. And we'll talk about what sorts of incidents will qualify a bear as category 1. So for the aversive conditioning, unfortunately, we just don't have a large enough staff to go out and condition every single bear that's getting into someone's trash. So what aversive conditioning is creating a negative experience on site for the bear. So shooting the bear with a rubber bullet sounds mean, but it's better for the bear in the long run to teach them not to come near our stuff, because the closer they come to humans, then their life is in danger because we might have to remove them because they're a public safety threat. Pyrotechnics, flare guns, anything that's going to scare that bear on the site to hopefully discourage them from coming back. Because we don't really have a large enough staff to respond throughout the state, we outsource a lot of this to local law enforcement. So every year we do what we call them police bear trainings, where we train law enforcement officers on how to respond to these bear complaints. And it's also better for residents because we don't have a very quick response time, right? But your local law enforcement should be able to get to you much faster so they can come on site if there's an issue with a bear. So what are some things that get a black bear into that category 1 designation? Home entry is one that we consider absolutely threatening behavior. It has to be an occupied residence, so a shed on your property that's unoccupied doesn't really count. It has to be an occupied residence. Vehicle entries, tent entries qualify. Unprovoked pet attacks. So unprovoked is specific because if there's a bear in your backyard and you let your dog out to chase the bear away and the bear attacks your dog, we don't consider that abnormal bear behavior. We consider that a bear that's getting defensive because there's a dog coming at it. Unprovoked would be you're walking your dog and a bear comes out of nowhere and attacks your dog. That is not normal bear behavior, so we assume that that bear has been conditioned in some way. Same with livestock attacks. If they're protected, you have adequate fencing, electric fencing up, and that bear still goes to significant measures to break in and get to your livestock, we consider that abnormal and dangerous behavior. Same thing for secured crops or secured, it says rabbit attack, but really any outdoor pet. Chickens, ducks would fall into that category. If you don't have your animals protected, they're just in your backyard and a bear comes in and eats one, that's kind of just bear behavior. We don't consider that a dangerous bear. That's just a bear doing bear things. Beehive damage of a protected hive. We have a lot of people in New Jersey that keep bees. We work actually a lot with local beekeepers on how to secure their hives properly. Electric fencing works really, really, really well if done correctly, and it requires a lot of maintenance. So our wildlife staff will actually come out and provide education as well to people who call in and ask for help with that. Last category 1 incident is the most serious, and that would be a human attack. So I always like to caveat this by I'm showing you the worst of the worst. These are not common incidents. Black bears are not typically aggressive. It really is about a 1 in a million chance because we've got, in North America, so Canada, Mexico, US, we've got about 960,000 black bears, and there's typically about 1 fatal attack a year. So, I mean, there are thousands of people that are having encounters with black bears every day, and it's going unreported because nothing happens. But, of course, when something happens, it gets sensationalized in the news, and we maybe think that these things happen more often than they actually do, but they do happen. I don't want to gloss over that they can be a potentially dangerous animal. And the data shows that bears that do tend to engage in these aggressive encounters with humans are habituated food-conditioned bears. So bears that have really lost that natural fear of humans, that are approaching humans, that maybe become defensive over a food source, like defensive over your trash can. These are the types of bears that are getting into trouble. And even habituated bears that seem really tame are unpredictable. They're wild animals. You know, anyone who tells you this is what you should do in every scenario with a wild animal and this is exactly how they'll react is full of it, right? We can't predict wild animal behavior. There's always a sense of unpredictability to that. So what are some things you can do? How can you be what we call bear smart? So these are the big ones. Keeping your home attractant free. So remember, bears have an amazing sense of smell. They can smell something interesting to them from 2 miles away. It's really important to keep your home free of things that are going to be very attractive smelling to a black bear. And we'll talk about some of those individual things. Using deterrents like motion-sensitive lights and alarms can go a really long way. Being bear smart while recreating outdoors. And we'll talk about more specifics of each of these things. But things like storing your food properly while you're out fishing or out camping. Knowing what to do when you see a bear when you're out on a hike. One of the best things you can do is to involve your community and talk to your municipality. I'll show you some data on towns that have, or HOAs that have adopted bear-resistant trash containers for the entire HOA and how that completely reduces their bear issues. But that really involves community-level engagement. So some examples of attractants, things that bears are going to smell on your property. Some of them are obvious: garbage, human food and drinks, birdseed, grills, compost piles. And some of them are not as obvious, like scented wildlife repellents. You'd think that they'd be to repel, but you know, certain scents that are repelling things like skunks and raccoons are actually attractive to a black bear. Even if it doesn't smell yummy to them, if it's an interesting smell, it still might engage them and bring them in. Hot tub covers and padded seats is like my fun fact that I like to bring to people. Maybe you've heard it before, but the insulation in the padding, as it breaks down, it releases a gas that smells extremely similar to formic acid. And formic acid is a chemical that's produced by ants for defense and for communication, and lots of things like to eat ants and bugs, so that actually attracts them. It's why a lot of older hot tub covers, you might see nibbles all over them from smaller animals. But yeah, hot tub covers actually are a bear attractant, believe it or not. So really the gold standard thing you can do with securing your trash is purchasing a bear-resistant trash can. These are really fun. I encourage you guys to go look at the IGBC website. Essentially, manufacturers can get their can IGBC certified by sending it to a captive grizzly facility in Montana, where they are loaded up with food and given to the captive grizzly. And if it can survive 1 hour of the bear actively trying to get into it, it gets certified as bear resistant. So there's people that sit there in the bleachers with stopwatches, because if the bear loses interest, the time stops. It has to be 1 hour of that bear actively trying to get into the can. And I think they even have, like, you can like go there and watch these product testings, which is fun. They have videos on their website. Not only do they make, you know, bear-resistant trash containers, but they also have dumpsters and containers for your existing trash can. We have a list of all the different suppliers that you can purchase these from on our website, and we are always adding to it. When we get funding, because one thing that is not insignificant is that these bear-resistant containers are expensive. You know, I think I paid $50 for my recycling and trash can. One bear-resistant container is going to run you about $200 to $400, depending on what it is, which is not something to turn your nose up on. You know, a lot of residents just can't afford that. So when our Division of Sustainable Waste actually gets grants yearly to provide bear-resistant cans to communities in need. So that is one way that we are trying to combat that cost. We've distributed thousands of cans in the past couple of years, and I'm hoping, we haven't gotten a final word on the funding yet, but I'm hoping we can do it again for 2026. But you don't have to. There's lots of other things that you can do. One big one is putting your garbage and your recycling out on collection day. So a lot of people put it out the night before because it's easier, so they don't have to wake up early. But bears are most active in that really early morning hours and through the night. So having your trash out at the end of your driveway the night before collection is giving a lot of extra time for that bear to go through your trash. So putting it out before you go to work, having your kids do it before they go to school really cuts down on a lot of that time that the bears had to go through it. Washing your containers on some sort of regular basis to cut down on the scent. Even if it doesn't smell to you, the bears can sniff it out. There's lots of videos online. I think it's Virginia Fish and Wildlife has a really good one on YouTube for how you can kind of retrofit your existing can to be more bear resistant. And even simple things like tying your can to a tree can help, because one of the biggest tactics a bear is going to do is they're going to try to drag it away and then work on it separate. So if you can secure it somewhere, that's kind of half the battle. It seems obvious, but like having enough containers to contain all of your trash, I can't even tell you. In Colorado, I think it's either Aspen or I think Aspen and Durango both have laws that require you to have a bear-resistant can. And they found that they had to require the automatic locking systems because people were closing them but then not locking them. And then even with the automatic locking systems, people were leaving the doors open and trash overflowing so that they couldn't be closed. So it's like you do also have to use them correctly, and you have to make sure that all your trash is in the container. I lived in an apartment complex for about 2.5 years that the dumpster lid was never closed because the trash was always overflowing. Obviously, it's not going to work, even if you have a bear-resistant dumpster, if you can't close it. Storing your containers in a shed, garage, a suitable enclosure when not being used is kind of best practice. My parents have a little wooden structure that they put theirs in, which works pretty well. But if you have a certified container, you can leave it outdoors. They're made for that. Bird feeders, so the best advice is to not feed birds. There are other ways to bring birds into your yard. Having bird houses, planting pollinator gardens that attract the insects that the birds are eating, bushes and trees that are bird habitat, bird baths, even having like a little dust bath out. They need that dust for their gizzards to digest. So, lots of things can bring birds into your backyard. But lots of people love feeding birds. It's not, the worst thing you could do. So we do recommend only feeding them in the winter when bears are least active. So we generally say December 1st to April 1st is a good time to feed the birds. You should hang your feeders at least 10 feet off the ground and 10 feet away from anything a bear can climb, and never hang a feeder from your deck or your house, because the last thing you want is a bear trying to scramble up the side of your house to get to a bird feeder. Just clean up the seeds. Thankfully we've got squirrels for that, right? They do a pretty good job. But just making sure there's not seeds all over your lawn. And bringing feeders indoors at night is also a great way to cut down on bears making visits. Pet food is a big bear attractant. I'd say that's about our number 3. Dog and cat food especially, but also things like chicken feed. We advise not to feed pets outdoors, especially people that like to leave food out 24/7 for like stray neighborhood cats and things like that. It's a really big bear attractant. But if you do feed animals outdoors, we just recommend doing it in single servings and cleaning up and removing the bowls after the animal's done eating. And if it's animals like chickens, ducks, just try not to store that food outdoors. Store it somewhere like a shed, somewhere secure. Grills, they love the grease left behind by after you cook a hamburger. So making sure that you're cleaning your grill every time you use it. And disposing of that grease in your trash, not just like dumping it in your backyard or dumping it in the woods. And best practice is to store a grill somewhere when you're not using it, but I know that's kind of impractical for most people. If you have an attractant on your yard that you're unwilling to get rid of, you should secure it. And the best way to do that is electric fencing. Whenever we get people saying that electric fencing doesn't work, it's typically because it's some sort of user error. Like we'll go out and say, okay, well your wires are sagging and they're shorting out because they're touching each other. Or you have improper grounding, or you're not mowing and weed whacking along the perimeter of the fence and the grass is shorting out the wires. Usually there's something. So again, I've said we've got resources on our website on how to set this up properly, and we also have people that will troubleshoot with you personally. But things like compost piles, beehives, pet enclosures, vegetable gardens, these are things that are really attractive to bears that could really benefit from an electric fence setup. For hiking and camping, these are probably our most common things that draw people outdoors for an extended period of time where they might have food with them. Just some tips for hiking. Try to avoid hiking, especially alone during dawn and dusk. Hiking in a group. So just grouping up is like a really amazing way to keep bears away, because making noise, carrying on a conversation, just the noise of a large group of people is going to deter 99% of bears from wanting to come near you. You can carry a whistle, be alert, be aware of your surroundings. Don't let children, lag behind or run ahead. Make noise, because you really just don't want to surprise a bear. Surprising a bear could potentially incite a defensive reaction. So basically, if you see a bear in the distance and they don't see you, you don't have to scare them away. You can kind of enjoy it, but turn around and go, back the way you came. Don't approach that bear. Never approach a bear that doesn't see you, especially, because you do not want to surprise that animal. Watch for bear signs. Like I mentioned before, you're probably going to see these signs before you actually see the animal. Bear scat usually looks pretty distinctive. You can see the berries and the nuts that they're eating right in the scat. Prints, of course. This is called a marker tree. So especially male bears will do this, but all bears will do it. They'll bite, claw, scratch at a tree to leave their scent behind, and it's a form of communication. So tell other males, this is my area. Tell females that there's a male in the area. It's kind of like how they're communicating with each other. And logs that look overturned or torn up, likely from a bear looking for insects. So you should also know the warning signs, kind of like a rattlesnake has a rattle. A black bear has certain behaviors that they're going to do to let you know that you're too close. They can be intimidating, but they're generally a good sign, right? The bear is not, they're warning you. Huffing, so really quick huffs. We call this jaw popping, but it kind of sounds like they're smacking their lips together. It's like a kind of noise. That's a really common one. You'll hear two males doing it to each other too before they engage in aggression. Bluff charges, that's a pretty scary one, but most bluff charges, I forget the actual statistic, but are just that. They don't make contact. Generally, that's when a bear will kind of like charge forward and swat at the ground, usually at the same time. But they generally aren't aiming to make contact with you. It's to scare you away. One of the other myths is that a standing bear is a bear that is being poised to attack. I hate when I see the taxidermy of bears and they're like that, looking all aggressive. Standing is a curious posturing, not an aggressive one. So typically, the bear has probably heard or smelled you, and they're standing up to get a better view of their surrounding, or they're trying to catch a scent in the wind. It's not an aggressive posturing. Camping or fishing, really anything, it's all about reducing that scent attractant. So keeping a campsite clean, storing food items in. You have a lot of options. I have an example of a bear-resistant food canister. This is a really nice one that you can store your food in. This is especially good for like a day trip, so you can fit your day's worth of food in there. You never want to store food or cook food or eat food in your tent where you're going to be sleeping. The last thing you want to do is draw a bear into your tent. Understand that scented toiletries might also attract bears. We had one incident where a teenage girl was pulled out of her tent by a black bear, and she had no food in there, but she had a lot of scented lotions. And we can't say for sure, but that could have been a reason. Like I said, anything interesting smelling to them, even if it's not food related, could draw them in. We recommend setting up your sleeping area at least 200 feet from where you're going to be cooking or eating your food. Also carry in, carry out. Don't bury garbage, don't burn garbage. Just some additional tips. We talked about motion sensor lighting. Having a plan for kids if you're going to be hiking, or even just what to do if you see a bear in the backyard. Neighborhood watches are great, and we now have apps for that, right? So you can warn your neighbors, hey, there's a bear on Maple Ave, bring your dogs inside. Local garbage management ordinances. So this is something you can do on a community level. This is data from, I think this was Juneau, Alaska, where they enacted an ordinance where you had to have a bear-resistant trash can. And it was enacted in 2004, and consistently their bear incidents have been so much lower since then. And like I said, this is a community-wide effort. Everybody really has to be on board, or else the bears are going to continue to be attracted to the neighborhood. If you need to report damage or nuisance behavior, or a bear acting funny, anything that's concerning to you, a bear in an area that you wouldn't expect to see a bear, you can report that to our hotline at 877-WARN-DEP. We want to hear about it. Another good reason for this, you're not being a tattletale on the bear, but like when we do have money to distribute bear-resistant cans to communities, we use this data. So we look to see what were the communities where people were calling in the most about trash complaints. So we use this data for a lot of reasons, and giving money back into the community is one of them. So the very last slide I have is just what should you do if you do encounter a bear in the wild. The best medicine is prevention. So grouping up, making noise, and storing your food properly is going to prevent most negative bear encounters. But if you do, so I know I mentioned before, if the bear is in the distance and they haven't noticed you, you don't need to try to scare that bear away. They're in the distance, just enjoy it, take a photo, use your telephoto lens, and then, leave the way you came. Always make an escape route for that bear. The last thing you want to do is corner them because you want them to run away and you don't necessarily want them to run towards you. Make loud noises. So we generally say clapping above your head and kind of waving your arms around while shouting something like "go away, bear," will work 99% of the time. Make yourself look big. Another tip is if you're wearing like a zipper jacket, you can unzip it and kind of put it out to the side of you. You just want to make yourself look as intimidating as possible. Black bears are not like something like a mountain lion. They're not really designed to take down large prey. So really, you're just trying to make it look like you're not worth it to them. They have plenty of food that they don't have to expend calories to get. You do want to avoid eye contact. They are a predator. Sometimes making eye contact can pose a threat to them. Stand your ground if they're bluff charging. I know that that's the scariest thing, but you do want to remain calm. The last thing you want to do is panic and run away. You want to stand your ground and you want to continue, waving your arms and being aggressive if they do bluff charge you. And then, once they're not moving, that's when you can back away. You want to back away, not run. Don't approach bears, don't feed bears, don't pet bears. But the reason you don't want to run, the first one being that you're not going to outrun a black bear. You're not going to win that race. Secondly, if you ever had a dog and you've thrown a tennis ball and you've seen that dog, they have that instinct to chase, right? So predators have this chase response. If a black bear sees something quite smaller than itself running away at a quick pace, it can elicit that same chase response. And you don't want to be pursued by a black bear. So you don't want to, tell that bear you might be a potential prey item, because what runs from a predator is prey. Playing dead, so that's another myth you might have heard. Playing dead can only work in very specific situations with brown bears. And that is a whole other presentation and conversation. If someone's interested, I'm happy to talk more about it, but suffice it to say, if a black bear is approaching you aggressively, it's because they're trying to attack you, and by laying down, you're just making it easy for them. So don't play dead. If a black bear is trying to initiate attack, you always fight back. You aim for their eyes and their nose. Those are their most sensitive spaces with all your strength. And we have reports of even children being able to fend off, an aggressive encounter this way. Because, like I said, bears aren't really built for this, putting in that much energy to taking down large prey. They're not even really preying on adult deer unless they're already dead. So you can deter a black bear attack in this manner. And again, I really need to find a more positive way to end these presentations, but we have a lot more information on our website. We have a lot of great videos you can watch. We have videos of our biologists conducting this research you can watch. Lots of amazing resources. That is also my contact information if there's any questions that you have that I can't get to, but I will take questions.
Would you go back one slide?
Sure.
And by the way, I really enjoyed your presentation. Really good.
Thank you.
On the do tab there, stand your ground if the bear bluff charges. I don't want to sound ignorant, but how do I know the bear's bluffing?
So that's a really long and nuanced answer, and I will caveat this by saying that every situation is unique. Like I said before, I can't tell you exactly this behavior means this. If you do this, this will happen. But in general, there are patterns, and a bear that is aiming to attack you is generally what we call a predatory bear. So this is a bear that wants to eat you. There's no nice way of saying that. And predatory behavior, they're not going to full-on charge you like that. It's going to be more of a stalking type of behavior. So a bear that's charging you and wolfing and swatting is generally telling you, like, get out of here. Like that, that's not generally preceding an attack. There's a great slide I should get that I went to a conference, I saw at a conference in October, where they were looking at reasons for grizzly bear attacks and reasons for black bear attacks. And grizzly bears attack for so many different reasons, a lot of them being defensive. Like you might have heard the mother bear trope. But black bears attacks were pretty much almost always predatory. So that predatory behavior is what you want to be more aware of when they're following you quietly. That's kind of what you don't want. Generally, if they're engaging in these behaviors, they're giving you that time to back away. And they're not generally making contact. Like a bluff charge might be just like one step with a swat. They're not like coming at you generally. But again, it's like I said, I don't want to say that, and then you go on YouTube and there's that video of that one bear that makes contact and it's an attack, and you're like, but the lady told me that wouldn't happen. But generally, that's how it works. You're welcome. Are there any other questions?
Yes.
So how many, do you keep track of black bear sightings, for instance, in Gloucester County? And if you do, how many have there been?
So it would only be if it was reported to us. And I don't think we have that data publicly available because I think we only have category 1 and 2 data available on the website. So I don't know the answer to that question. We do keep track of it because we have our maps of sightings, but I don't know the number off the top of my head. I think the farthest south since I've been working here was down in Manchester, maybe, that we've had like complaints and calls about. But yeah, I don't know how to get that information, honestly. Sorry. Are there any other questions?
You mentioned bear spray.
Yes. Okay, so bear spray is the bane of my existence because it works and it is effective and it is also illegal in New Jersey. Yeah, the laws are state mandated, so it's different in every state you go to. And in some states, it's legal, but not legal in certain areas of the state. Like it's illegal in Yosemite, but I think it's legal in the state of California. But you can't use it if you're in Yosemite. It's classified as a weapon under New Jersey law, so it's regulated as such. And the regulation states that you can only have less than 3/4 of 1 ounce of pepper spray. And to be called bear spray, you have to be at least, I think it's 7.9 ounces, because what you're trying to do is create a barrier between you and the bear at about 30 feet away. You're not walking up to a bear and spraying them in the eyes, right? You're trying to create a wall so that the bear doesn't come close to you. So, a little thing of pepper spray is not gonna do that. You need that projectile. And unfortunately, under our, that law that designates it as a weapon, you're only allowed to carry that 3/4 of an ounce. But what makes it so annoying is that it's also really easy to get. They sell it at REI, they sell it at hunting and sporting goods stores, they sell it at Costco. You can get a 2-pack for $50 at Costco. So it's really confusing for residents, and we get a lot of calls about this. All I can say is that it is effective, but it is illegal to carry and use. There are senators, Senator Anthony Bucco of Morris County tried to amend that law to say that you could legally carry and use it in a situation in which it was reasonable to expect you might encounter a bear. Like a hunter should be able to have a can of bear spray. There are so many studies out there that show that bear spray is more effective than firearms for so many reasons. But like one being nobody's as good of a shot as they think they are in a panic situation, and not to be graphic, but it does take a lot to take down a bear, and it's not instantaneous, and you have just now agitated that bear. Whereas the bear spray, you're literally preventing that bear from coming near you. And you're giving yourself time to get away. So it's unfortunate, but it is illegal. I can't recommend it.
Speaking of hunting, is there a black bear season?
Yes. So we have 2 weeks in the year where you are allowed to legally hunt black bear. We just finished up segment 1 in October, and then it's 1 week, 6 days technically, and then we'll have another one in December. And it's really tightly regulated, so we have goals with the harvest. We currently, based on what our population is and the amount of calls and complaints that we get, we like to aim for a 20% reduction in population yearly because of how quickly it is expanding. So basically, if we don't get to at least 18%, we will have that second segment in December. And there is an option for another segment in December if we don't get to 18% by then. But then the hunt will be closed if we get to 20% because we don't want to go over that, because that's what we're considering keeping our population stable. We don't want to decrease it, but we don't necessarily want it increasing either. So that's all very tightly regulated. Kind of like the deer hunt, you can kind of just log in on your phone and register your harvest, but with the bear hunt, it's much more, you have to bring the bear to us. We inspect it, we make sure it was a legal harvest because we have rules on the size and weight of a bear that you can legally take. So it's very tightly managed. But yeah, basically 2 weeks every year. And actually my job exists because Governor Christie Whitman canceled the hunt one year and for several years after. And so we basically said, that's our population management tool. What are you going to do? Because you've canceled it and we got a bunch of money for education. So that was the birth of my job. But yeah, so, and I know, and Murphy had restricted it and canceled it several times before. We'll see what happens with the new administration. But generally we have a hunt. Sometimes it's closed to state lands. Sometimes, there's varying degrees of what the hunt might look like every year.
So you are in favor, your DEP is generally in favor of having a bear hunt?
Yes, generally. And that could change if we ever see a dip in population, but I don't foresee that happening anytime soon. But yeah, and Fish and Wildlife we manage the hunt, and our Fish and Game Council is who makes the decision on whether the hunt is a yes or a no every year. And you asked if people eat bear meat. Yes, they do. Actually, I've worked the check station for, I guess, 4 segments now, and there's only been 2 bears that came in what we call live weight, so not field dressed with ice in the cavity. So I assume that almost all of our hunters are actually eating the bears. They'll give us sausage at the end of the season as a thank you. So yeah, not for me, but I'm not going to judge how you get your meat. I get mine at ShopRite, so it's probably more ethical to do it yourself, but not for me.
Did you come down from Sussex?
Yeah, I'm born and raised Sussex County.
Is
So.
West Milford in Sussex? Or is that
No, West Milford is closer to New York City. It's more east. Is it Passaic? I think it's Passaic. We have a lot of bears in western Passaic County, and actually West Milford is the site of our only ever fatal bear attack in 2014, I think it was.
Okay, you gotta tell us about that.
So that, and you can actually look up someone Oprah'd it, so you can read all the files and everything. But essentially it was a group of, I think it was 5 or 6 Rutgers students that were going for a hike. I forget the hike that they were going on, but it was in West Milford. And they got to the parking lot, and there was a couple coming out of the woods, and they said, hey, just so you know, there's a bear on the trail, and it's acting kind of funny, like it's following us, just so you know. They decided that they wanted to go and get a picture of the bear. So at this point, I would have said, thank you for telling me, let's go somewhere else. Yeah. But they went in, and they did see the bear, and when the bear started kind of following them, even when they turned around, they panicked, they split up, they run. And one of the boys, his name was Darsh Patel, he tripped and fell and lost one of his shoes. I think one of his shoes went down a hill, and he was like, go on, go on, go on. So they think he stayed back to get his shoe, and a few hours later, his body was found. So that was our only ever fatal attack. It was a predatory black bear. The black bear did consume him. Yeah, not like my favorite thing to talk about, but...
So that was probably like what, in the summer or fall when they're.
I forget. I want to say it was September, but don't quote me on that. There's lots of articles about it. You can Google.
Not to mine.
And maybe not before you go out on a hike. But yeah. We did. And that's how we know we got the right bear, because of the stomach contents and everything. So there was a whole investigation. But yeah, that was an abnormally acting bear. That was not typical. But that bear was absolutely predatory. So it happens, which is why we say they still need to be respected. You know, as cute as they are, as docile as they usually are, they are capable of causing great harm. So they definitely need to be respected and treated as such. Any other questions?
So do you go to like schools and different groups?
Yeah, so mostly schools and scouts are my two main groups, but also retirement facilities, really anyone who wants to hear me talk for about an hour. Yeah, thank you. There was a question in the back?
Yeah, what's the mating behavior like? Does the male just mate and then go away, or is there worship? Or?
The male and the female will spend generally 2 weeks together. I don't know that I would call it courting, but they'll kind of hang out for about 2 weeks. But then once the mating event is over, the male splits. Something interesting about mating, just for some more fun facts, is that males and females will both mate with multiple partners. So it's called, they're both polyamorous, polygamous and polyandrous. Both males and females mate with multiple partners. Obviously, this is a strategy for males, get their genetics out in as many females as possible, but also it's a strategy for females because bears are pretty much at the top of the food chain here in New Jersey. The biggest threat that bears have is other bears, and a male bear will kind of remember who he has bred with, and so he'll assume that the cubs are his and he will leave them alone, but to put a female back in estrus, he might kill her cubs so that he can then mate with her. So by mating with as many males as possible, there's more, a female is keeping her cubs safe because that male will think there's a reasonable chance that those are mine, I'm not going to kill them. So it's a strategy for both of them. And one litter is not necessarily all the same father. There can be multiple, we've determined that there's multiple paternities sometimes in litters. So really fascinating stuff. Yes?
When you relocate a bear, does it try to get back to the territory it was removed from?
Yes, so that is our biggest thing. I talk to a lot of people that, they come here and they immediately want to be like, I don't like the bear hunt and I want to talk to you about it. And the first thing they say is, why aren't you relocating bears? Because we actually aren't. The only time that we're relocating a bear is if it's an urban bear that, is up a tree in the middle of a park in South Orange and we have to remove that bear, and we'll put it on our nearest wildlife management area. But we're not relocating problem bears. And the reason for that is it doesn't even work in Yellowstone, where they have vast amounts of open land. Those bears they go right back. Even when we aversively condition bears, in a matter of 2 weeks, those bears are back on site. It just doesn't work. And we can't give them to other states. We can't. There was at one point in the 80s when we proposed moving some bears down into the Pine Barrens to very, very vocal opposition from people living in South Jersey. So, is it ethical to just put a problem somewhere else? Probably not. So relocation really doesn't work, and it's not super ethical. We just don't have enough open space in New Jersey for that ever to solve the problem. So it's expensive and doesn't work anyway. So unfortunately, because it's the nicest thought, right? But it just doesn't work. Any other questions?
Stephanie, could you put the last slide back up again with the contact information?
Yes. That is our Trenton hotline. So wherever your concern is, they'll kind of dispatch it where it needs to go based on that. And that's where we get all of our, so if you go on our website, you can look at the number of different types of complaints by county. And that's how we are recording that information, is based on the calls to this hotline. So absolutely, if there's a bear issue that's like immediate, call your local police, but then report it to us after, because the police database and our database is actually separate. There's not as communication between those two things. So if you need immediate help, call the police, but also report it to us as well, please.
So that map that you shows that the bears in the northwestern part of New Jersey are migrating south. Do bears from New York State, are they migrating down south?
We've had bears from Maryland. We have bears from PA. They don't recognize political boundaries, so they're moving, especially the males. I think there was only 1 or 2 occasions that we got a tagged bear that was a Maryland bear, but it happens. I think the only state around here that doesn't have bears is Delaware, actually. Delaware does not have bears, so I guess they don't cross the river. Yeah, I mean, not typically. but probably more than we think, but it's not something we necessarily have specifically studied. But yeah, we've seen PA bears, we've seen Maryland bears coming in and out, and that's one of the reasons that we have a lot of conferences. We have the Eastern Black Bear Conference that I go to every year, because it's helpful for the states to have standardized responses, because sometimes we're sharing bears, so it's good if we're responding the same in every way. So it's pretty cool. It's a fun job.
And you got a degree in what?
So my degree, I have 2 master's degrees. One is in ecology and evolution, and the other is in molecular biology. So I have... So I went to Delaware Valley for my undergrad, and then I went to Montclair for my first master's, and then I went to New Mexico State for my second master's, because I wanted to leave the state and then have an adventure. But yep, and actually my undergrad is in English. I was going to be an English teacher. And then I realized that killed my soul, so went into biology. Thank you. Thanks.